If you're following German or international media, you may have seen or heard of these guys, the so-called Reichsbürger, the imperial citizens or citizens of the German Empire. Who are they exactly? What do they claim and aspire to? And are they dangerous? Let's see. So the main line of thought uniting this diverse movement is that they reject the German Federal Republic, its laws and system altogether, and some even want to overthrow it, by force of arms included. In December 2022, they even planned a coup against what they deemed the corrupt establishment. 3,000 police officers carried out a raid in several federal states. They searched dozens of homes or business premises, took 25 people into custody. Among them, people from different sectors of activity, former or active soldiers, police officers, judges or doctors. Blacklists, ammunition, machine guns, they seem to have it all, and according to the Attorney General, the group is said to have planned to abolish democracy in Germany and replace it with an empire based on the model from 1871. The latter goal of the group led the investigators classifying people involved in this act as Reichsbürger. But what do the term and the associated scene actually mean? Well, in fact, it is a pretty diverse group of radicals. There is no generally accepted definition for the term. A unified movement or ideology don't really exist. The individual groups are partly at odds with each other. Their mental construct mostly consists of right-wing, extremist, racist, anti-Semitic ideology, conspiracy theories, or esoteric worldviews. However, they all seem to have one thing in common. They do not recognize the Federal Republic of Germany as a state, because they claim the German Reich still exists today, but it is occupied by the Allies and is being exploited systematically by them. The Reich citizens consistently ignore the historical facts. They often use the borders of 1937 as a basis for their so-called empire. Quick fact check, the empire ended 1945 with the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. Then there is the obsession with Germany being a company, ironically named GmbH in German, owned by Americans because since then it was never independent. Well, you know, it's one thing to talk about cultural and political hegemony, but to say Germany is not independent is simply bollocks. Ever since the 2+4 understanding agreement in 1990, reunified Germany has gained complete and definitive sovereignty. Anyone who denies the existence of the Federal Republic also denies implicitly the legitimacy of the Grundgesetz, the Constitution, so authorities and courts, and does not accept their decisions. Taxes and government levies are also illegal from this point of view, so this ideology serves as a good excuse for tax evasion. The Reich citizens tend to found their own governments or monarchies with chancellors or kings. They print fancy papers and issue their own money, like in Saxony-Anhalt, for example. There is a self-proclaimed king of Germany whose real name is Peter Fitzek, with his own Reich and his own currency. Some people cannot be turned around by simply telling them facts. They have constructed a vision of their own and are mostly unreachable, which also makes them pretty dangerous. If you want to get closer to this milieu, you first have to have a look at the annual reports by the federal and state offices for the protection of the Constitution, the verfassungsschutz. Accordingly, there are currently 23,000 people in Germany who are assigned to this scene. Many of them are so-called lone wolves, but up to 30 organizations are also under observation. The federal states of Thuringia, Saxony, and Bavaria stand out in the per capita distribution. There should also be significantly more representatives of the milieu in the small and medium-sized towns or in the villages rather than in the urban areas. And then there is another striking feature. It is a group consisting almost exclusively of women and men over the age of 40. For this reason, there is repeated talk of radicalization in adulthood. Among the Reich citizens are people who belong to the right-wing extremist scene, as well as those who can be assigned to other scenes. What is striking is the proximity of the Reich citizens to topics such as alternative medicine, scientific denial, esotericism, nature and environment, as well as a general inclination to all sorts of possible conspiracy theories or just off-the-track narratives. As different as the milieu may sometimes appear, the fundamentals of their thinking are quite similar. Many people falling for this are those with certain personality traits, sensitivities, some kind of resistance to change, and they are more prone to conspiracy theories than others, particularly in a crisis situation, so of economic and political instability, when they feel the need to gain some kind of emotional resort, and they find it in such a worldview. By the way, this is Irina. I'm a historian and history teacher. If you're interested in Norse myth, Vikings, Germanic languages, and different aspects about Scandinavian and German culture, and if you enjoy these talks, please consider hitting the subscribe button and helping my channel grow. All right, coming back to our topic. These folks are united in an ideological worldview similar to a conspiracy. It is true that for the vast majority of the Reich citizens, that they are convinced that the foreign power would stand in the background and thus exercise control over governments, companies, or the media. So this is not really a founded criticism of some sort of the capitalistic system per se. This is about finding a boogeyman and also believing democracy itself is flawed and thus replaceable. Neither the German state nor the life of the people could ever be sovereign, in their opinion. As a result, demanding sovereignty, either for Germany or for one's own life, is one of the core demands of the scene. If you start looking for why the scene assumes that there is a lack of sovereignty everywhere, you will end up deep in the anti-Semitic madness. Just like the nobleman Heinrich XIII living in Thuringia, Prince Royce, many citizens of the Reich are obsessed with the fact that Jewish families like the Rothschilds are actually in power. As in other anti-Semitic scenes, many members of the scene are careful not to express hatred of Jews too openly. The alleged power in the background is therefore not described in more detail but conveyed via ciphers or codes. Both the conspiracy ideological worldview and the covert anti-Semitism make the scene connectable in different directions. There are a lot of intersections with far-right extremism. That is not to say that everyone here is a neo-Nazi, but some lines of thought are structurally extremist. Disappointed Querdenker, alternative thinkers, you might know them from the pandemic times, or apparently parts of the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland party, as well as all kinds of people struggling with modernity, are not only looking for an explanation for their own impossibility of getting along with current circumstances and changes in their local society, they also want instructions, specific instructions on what to do next. And this is exactly where the Reichsbürger scene is helpful. It provides the worldview, the ideology, including enemy images, and the plan of what to do next. This doesn't always have to end in fantasies of a coup, as was the case with the group arrested on the 7th of December. Some of them also promote the so-called system exit, for example, by joining a community, a secluded community, that then tries out a new life somewhere at the countryside or in a castle. Reichsbürger are not new, but they are inventive and they can indeed be considered dangerous. The first Reich citizens, so people who claimed a large-scale conspiracy around the German state and its history, already existed in the 70s and 80s. Among them were openly right-wing extremists, such as the lawyer and right-wing terrorist Manfred Röder, former military judge and defendant of Rudolf Hess, as well as bizarre figures such as the railway worker Wolfgang Ebel, who, after losing his job in the 80s, proclaimed himself chancellor. The complexity of the milieu existed from the very beginning. There were repeated attempts by the militant neo-Nazi scene to influence this milieu as well. For example, the lawyer and anti-Semite Horst Mahler wrote a constitution for the Fourth German Reich. At the same time, other Reich citizens such as Wolfgang Ebel mentioned before developed the typical scams and practices that are still popular today, like you produce your own passports, threatening letters are sent to the authorities, and imaginary governments are convened. Even then, this side of the milieu meant that the scene was not really taken that seriously. They were referred to as nutcases and troublemakers, and thus the dangers and the ideology were downplayed. However, when in 2016 there were 2 armed attacks on the police by people in the scene, one after the other, this assessment changed. A police officer was shot to his death near Nuremberg following a razzia. From the milieu, there were repeated attempts to establish themselves nationwide. For example, the founding of the German Police Aid Organization. Here, citizens of the Reich had posed as police officers, wore uniforms, and planned to take over the rightful police and authorities. The group around Volker Schöne is said to have extended to several hundred people between 2012 and 2013. Also, Reich citizens are not an isolated group. One seeks contact with other scenes, ideological similarities that exist, in particular with the right-wing extremists, put them in the category willing to resort to violence. As in the beginning, today's milieu had no uniform goals. Some wanted to rebuild the historic German Empire. Others are content with creating their own state. However, there is this train of thought, this agreement in rejecting and fighting against today's democracy in Germany. Popular enemy images are not only Jews, but also police officers, judges, bailiffs, or journalists, so anything that has to do with state power. The results of a survey by the YouGov Institute in 2016 show that up to 6% of Germans found the ideas of the Reich citizens understandable. The recruitment of Reich citizens during the Corona years also seems to have been successful. Otherwise, the scene would not have grown here. Against these two backgrounds, it is first and foremost important to provide broad and good information about the milieu so that more people do not connect. Citizens of the Reich specifically collect those who are disappointed and insecure, especially in times of crisis, just like cults do, as a matter of fact. It is therefore also important that the state and society find good and quick answers to mitigate the consequences of these crises. This should not be taken lightly, especially the heavy criticism received by German authorities for not acting firmly enough in right-wing terrorist acts which happened in recent history, such as in Hanau in 2020. Since there are many Reich citizens among adults, prevention concepts for young people are less in demand than for adults, which is why it is primarily important to find new ways of communicating and instructing, so for political education with adults. A preliminary stage of the Reich ideology is the tendency to conspiracy thinking, so if people are just at the beginning here, they can still be reached somehow. On the other hand, Reich citizens who have already been radicalized, they can often not be reached either argumentatively with facts or pedagogically. Since there is a considerable danger for the rest of society here, precise risk analyses must be drawn up and the means of the rule of law must be enforced and bettered. It is estimated that at least 500 of these so-called imperial citizens legally possess weapons. Investigations have to be conducted in security structures of the state, military, police as well, because if you have people involved with some kind of extremism, that really becomes a problem. These areas must also particularly be protected from anti-democratic ideas. For imperial ideology in particular, as well as conspiracy ideology in general, can only be successfully tackled if early forms are recognized and people do something about it. That's why one of the lessons of the Corona years should be that online activities by conspiracy ideologists or speeches by these people at anti-health measure demos, for example, should be handled more responsibly. Bans don't bring that much, as nowadays you can easily regroup online and focus more on online activities. Speaking of which, social media platforms also share great responsibility in handling such kind of such a discourse, because the reaction is important here, which they don't often do. What is also important is, for example, leading a democratic protest or engaging with counter narratives to this imperial story or anything of the kind. In this moment, neither politics nor society seem to have a unified strategy of how to go about this particular movement, but just perceiving it as simply a bunch of lunatics with nothing better to do than trying to revive the empire is definitely the wrong approach. What are your thoughts on the matter? How can we better deal with such movements from the radical fringe? Leave your comments below, and until the next topic, all the best to you and keep a cool head. Cheers!